Better Show. I'm your host, Paul Vogelsang. Many Americans are considering cutting back on the amount of gluten in their diets or avoiding it altogether. In a recent poll, 30% of adults said they wanted to cut down or be free of gluten. Well, what is gluten? There are many myths surrounding gluten, and the truth is that for most people, a gluten-free diet won't provide a benefit at all. Gluten, of course, is a protein. It's found in many grains, including wheat, rye, barley. It's found in most breads, cereals, pastas, and many processed foods. People who have a condition called celiac disease develop an immune reaction to gluten that damages their intestine, and so they need to avoid that protein. About 1% of the population has celiac disease, but among the 55-plus age community, the audience of the Not Old Better Show, diagnosis of celiac disease is on the rise and is almost double over the general population. You can eat a healthy diet without gluten, but you have to be very knowledgeable, and most people are unaware. Our guest today, Cynthia Kupper, is the CEO of the Gluten Intolerance Group, or GIG. Cynthia is one very aware person about the subject of gluten. She is really one of the world's foremost authorities on the subject of gluten, gluten diets, gluten contamination, and what the future holds for those of us trying to eat healthy and trying to do it the right way. Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Cynthia Kupper. Cynthia Kupper from the Gluten Intolerance Group. Thanks so much for joining us today. I just think, Cynthia, there are a lot of questions I have. I'm somebody who is newly diagnosed with celiac within the last 2 years. I'll be 60 in May. There are a lot of us out there. I know you are a registered dietitian. You're somebody who also has battled with this same condition, and so on a lot of levels, you've got you've got a big role. So, what is it that the Gluten Intolerance Group is doing and doing differently than other groups? And what's your role in specifically, apart from kind of a clinical role? I mean, you're a CEO, you have more of an administrative function. So how are you making all of this kind of come together at a time that we really need this information?
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, I'm the CEO here, and I am a clinical dietitian. So initially, my role was, of course, to provide most of the education and support to consumers. But over the course of the years, and as our programs have expanded, you're right, my role is more of an administrative to make sure processes, management systems are really put in place that will allow us to continue to grow instead of outgrowing how we function. Um, what GIG does on a big scale is we have two programs that support consumers. The primary program is education, resources. We do children's camps. We put on activities for youth, teenagers. We're doing an international teen conference here next year. We also work with local support groups. So right now in the United States, we're one of only two organizations that has local support groups out there. So we provide a lot of support and community effort for them so that they can help people locally. The other programs that we do to help consumers is food safety. So we launched a few years ago a certification program for products, and we launched a certification program for food services. And those programs provide an easy way for consumers, people like you and me, to see a product, to visit a restaurant, and know that they could potentially eat there very safely. With a little bit of information behind them.
I, of course, have had a chance to look at the website, and I've seen a fair bit of the work that you do on the certification side of things, and I think that's really important. I want to get back to that, but I want to talk about something that you mentioned just a moment ago, and that is the work that you do with teens, and I think that's very important. I think there's this myth and maybe a misconception about some of the gluten-based intolerances and even celiac disease that it might not be present in those of us who are over age 55. but that's really not the case. As a matter of fact, there is a almost a outbreak of it within this
Mhm.
age community. So, how is the organization responding to this change? Really, age group.
It's a perfect question, Paul. Most often, people are diagnosed actually in the fifth decade of their life. So we're getting diagnosis at increasing rates in the late 40s, early 50s. And even older than that, we've seen diagnosis as late as 80 years old. We have identified for us two key groups of people who don't seem to have as much support as they need: the teens
Mm-hmm.
and the mature adults. The teens, the issue there is that for some reason, probably related to hormones being activated and stuff, a lot of times if they are symptomatic, they don't feel those symptoms in the teenage years. We're seeing that change a little bit, but when you get to be older, people make assumptions that, especially if you're in some type of a living situation outside of your independent home, that if you're not feeling good, you're tired, maybe you have loose stools, that's just part of aging, and it's really not. So we're finding that people are not getting proper diagnosis because people don't know what to look for. And that's one of the areas that we really want to put a lot of effort into is how do we help the mature adult to get a diagnosis, to understand that these tummy aches and weight loss and not feeling good, it's just not part of the normal aging process. There's got to be something else going on.
And it's really kind of along those lines that I think this is kind of an interesting point, and that is that it's almost a condition that at times needs a little bit more seriousness attached to it because it isn't just about kind of an upset stomach sometimes. It can be a very devastating condition. And I think it's also one that maybe, food service industry might not be always so ready to embrace. I don't know. I'm curious about
Right.
your opinion about that. And so I'm curious about this certification process. Are restaurants eager to talk to you? Are they turning a blind eye? Do they see this as a customer population that they want to serve? Where is kind of the sweet spot there?
Well, let me talk a little bit about people in restaurants not wanting to maybe possibly work with these people. The challenge we have with celiac disease and other gluten-related disorders is that sometimes the symptoms that you or I might have mimic so many other things:
Mm-hmm.
anemia, osteoporosis, maybe chronic fatigue or chronic pain syndromes. So it becomes really difficult to diagnose this unless you have a physician who's really on the cutting edge of understanding what gluten related disorders are all about. And you're absolutely right. When we find diagnosis later in life, say in the 50 years, and you've maybe had symptoms that you haven't dealt with before that time, your risk of GI cancers, which are very aggressive, tends to be fivefold what a normal person might have as a risk for cancers. And yet, if we can get this under control, and we can stay on a well managed gluten free diet, your risk actually decreases below the general population. So there's really a strong need to help educate the physicians and to make sure that people are getting proper diagnosis and not just having their symptoms sort of swept under the rug, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. When it comes to restaurants and food services, I think there's two groups we're talking to. So the restaurants, they're getting it now. They get that they can upcharge somebody for a gluten-free meal
Mm-hmm.
and that they will also get more people in. So they're seeing the economic benefit of that. The real risk today is that I find restaurants more dangerous today
Mm-hmm.
than they were a few years ago because the restaurants get that there's a money factor here that's important to them, and they may not fully understand what they need to be doing. On the other hand, if you start talking about retirement assisted living, those types of facilities, they don't want to deal with this at all. And that's making it very hard for people like me, who may someday want to go into one of those facilities, and I won't have my needs taken care of because the facility just doesn't want to have to deal with it. There are some who do it very well, but most of them go, oh, I'm not doing that.
And so when GIG is looking at the certification specifically around the number of products as well as offering certification to food services industry, how do you get these facilities to pay attention to this idea that there's more to this than just simply being wheat free or adding tapioca? How do they get, for example, that it's an issue sometimes of contamination and separation?
So we take a two-pronged approach to this. The first thing we do is we educate, and go out to lectures, whether it's schools or campuses, hospitals, care facilities, and we provide education to that community about why this is important, who the population coming into their facilities is, and what their needs are. After we do education, the next thing we do is we try to get them involved and at least putting practices in place that would model possibly our certification program for food service or join our certification program for food service. And part of the draw there is our reputation and what we've done. So for over 20 years, we have worked with all types of large restaurant chains, hospitals, campuses, and nursing facilities or extended care facilities that actually do implement a gluten-free menu. Just to be clear though, Paul, we have two programs in certification. The one is around food service. And in that one, we have standards that the food service has to meet in setting up policies and procedures. We review those to make sure they meet our standards. And then we actually go into the facilities the first time announced, but the next time we go in, it's always unannounced. And we do audits. So we are checking to make sure they're following them. We're making sure their documentation is there, that their staff understands the questions when we ask them. The other certification program called GFCO or Gluten-Free Certification Organization is for products only. So these would be products that you would buy in the store. They have a food label on them. And in that program, again, we have very strict standards and that the companies have to meet. We require product testing management systems to be in place. And we send auditors in there to those facilities to make sure that they're doing it. They have recording requirements back to us. So that's that big program that you mentioned earlier that we certify over 39,000 products, and we go into about 29 countries around the world to do audits.
That is really just an overwhelming and impressive number. Now, that's also the program that I might identify that program as a consumer based on the kind of the GF that I might see as part of the food label.
Right. So you'll see a circled GF that says certified gluten-free on the label. And the only way to get that is, again, to go through the standards process. We go in and do internal audits. They have to do testing. They have to send us testing on a regular basis. And we do what's called surveillance. So that means that we pull a percentage of all of the products we certify every year and test them ourselves, independent of what the companies are doing.
In my research, GIG was really the only group that I found that was, yeah, I mean, even including some of the government reviews, that was really stating some of these numbers, the 34,000, the 39,000. Again, that's just such a huge number. And you can, if you think about it and you think about just the various ingredients that go into products, I mean, that alone has to be almost overwhelming to juggle and to quantify, and then I guess to just further certify. One of the questions that I have about all of that is, how do you stay on top of that and still try to provide food that has a taste to it that is going to be tasty enough for a restaurant to want to serve to its customers, so that somebody does come back for more? There's a whole level of thought that goes into that.
So it's a very good point. And sometimes we say we certify a lot of products. We're not saying that they're all tasty, but we do certify a lot of products. Through our education programs, though, and I have another dietitian and nutritionist on staff, We are always trying to educate people about what makes good products, which ones might have more fiber or more nutrients in them. That those p- that education process really is still driving the industry. So the industry is paying attention to consumers who say, I want something that is more than just rice and tapioca.
Hmm.
I want something that has more nutrition. So they're starting to use some of those ancient grains that are gluten free, or some of the companies are starting to add supplement vitamins and minerals into their products because in truth, if it's not made with a whole grain that is gluten free, or these ancient grains like quinoa, amaranth, teff, and sorghum, they don't have as many nutrients as their counterpart that is wheat based, because wheat based products are required to be enriched.
We are with Cynthia Kupper. Cynthia is the CEO of the Gluten Intolerance Group. Cynthia, I think food is often viewed as a social experience. But do you think that the education needs to both tackle the taste component as well as the implementation?
Definitely. There are a number of studies that are done by people like Mentel that show that a couple of the primary areas of concern for people who eat gluten-free foods is one, taste, and one, nutritional quality, or two, nutritional qualities. So having manufacturers understand that and embrace it is very important. Part of the struggle for manufacturers is knowing how to do it. Um, as you may be aware, or your wife aware, as you cook gluten free, the normal properties of what we expect wheat to do just don't happen with
Mm-hmm.
the flours that we use in a gluten free product. So it changes manufacturing processes a bit, and that can be a struggle. But it's very important that manufacturers start to look at these products and say, how do I make it healthier?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what consumers want. And we are starting to see some of those breads and pastas that are made with quinoa or sorghum rather than just rice and tapioca. We're starting to see seeds like teff.
But I know
And
exactly what you mean. It's almost that yeast quality, that wonderful softness to the bread with the yeast quality just goes away, and you kind of
yeah.
have to adjust your taste.
And that can be very hard as we get older. Our taste buds are formed very young in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so the older we get, it's harder for some people to just say, well, I don't need bread, or I don't like this bread, but I'm going to eat it because I want bread. When they're really looking for that nice, soft, spongy bread.
Mm-hmm. If we look forward a little bit, because certainly you've done a tremendous amount of work, what is it that kind of next on the horizon for GIG? And certainly, how does technology play a role in some of this work that you're doing?
So part of what we're doing in the future, the first 20 years of GIG was really about patient support. The last 20 years, 22 years has been about really advancing food safety and some of the other programs that we do to make sure that people have choices that are safe. So we have started to do some research around food safety. Not a lot of people are interested in doing food safety research related to gluten-free, because the where the money is going to come to the researchers is coming from finding a drug that people can take, so they
Mm-hmm.
don't have to worry about this.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, having safe food is very important. So we just published and held some webinars on a beer study we did, showing that gluten removed beers may not be very safe for people with celiac disease or other gluten related disorders. We've got two additional studies coming out that deal with oats, and we would like to do some studies related to yeast. There are a number of fallacies that have been around for a number of years, or facts that may not be true today that were true years ago. And so we want to make sure that when we're making decisions for food safety, we're looking at those and we're creating a study design that would validate our decision-making process. That means that consumers may or may not be aware of different testing methods, but companies definitely have to be. And consumers may also want to be aware that some of the testing methods that are out there that are designed for consumers to use to test their own food, there's a lot of issues around using those, including not being validated. So, it's very important to us that we're looking at the science end of it. Along with that, it's trying to figure out how to make sure that we're staying in touch with the older population, um, while getting much more tech savvy. I look at my 80-year-old grandmother and I look at other people and I'm going, okay, she can text, she can do this, but she's still struggling with other aspects of technology. So helping them to come up to speed on some of those, how can we make it easier? So we're looking at some of those aspects of getting information out for them.
With respect to the science, do you actually go through almost a for lack of a better, is there almost a clinical trial process that you go through with some of your testing?
So, because we are dealing with food, we don't necessarily go through a clinical trial. We do have an IRB process that we go through, and where important, we go through and work directly with a university who does celiac research. So, our beer study was done at the University of Chicago. I have a PhD researcher on staff, and so she designs the studies. We make sure that the study is designed well, then it can be replicated, and then we find a partner who will help us to conduct those studies.
Probably the real question is if members of my audience want to help GIG, what would you ask them to do next?
What we need when we do studies is actually blood. We partner with University of Chicago to get samples of known celiac patients. We get their blood. And in that way, we're able to do some studies that you just don't normally do with food. So people would be donating to a blood bank through either one of the universities who do research, and then we purchase it from them.
So what's the biggest challenge for the team right now in terms of communicating these messages, both to the teen population as well as to the 55 plus age group?
One of the biggest challenges is the internet. Everything's true on the internet, right?
Right.
So, trying to find ways to help people understand that the old myths and the old thinking was simply that it's outdated and it really doesn't apply. Um, 15 years later, we're still dealing with the vinegar issue at times. It's because you can find old stuff on the internet that we just can't get rid of, and we'd like to get rid of it. So helping people to understand what is valid information, what is not, how to verify that the information is accurate, going to reliable sources for their information.
So give us the website and tell us what that website address is.
Our main website is gluten.org. And from that website, you can actually access the food safety websites, which deal with the 2 different certification programs. You can also access all of the local branches that we have across the country. And actually, we have 4 right now that are international.
Well, this is, I think, the start of probably several other conversations that we want to have with Cynthia Kupper and her team at the Gluten Intolerance Group at GIG. That's gluten.org. Cynthia, thanks so much for joining us today. I think this is an important subject, one that is going to need a little bit more awareness behind it, and we want to help, and you're already doing so much. So thank you for everything that you're doing, and let us know how we can help further.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks to our guest today, Cynthia Kupper from the Gluten Intolerance Group, and for all her team's help on the podcast. As usual, we'll post links to everything, to gluten.org, all of the various subsites that Cynthia mentioned, and as usual, my thanks to you, the listeners, for joining me today. Your time is valuable. I'm grateful you're spending some of it with me today. I'm always interested in feedback, and you can leave that at iTunes, Google Play, or send me an email at info@notoldbetter.com. That's notold-better.com. And you can find me on Voxer at notoldbetter, where you can easily leave me a voice text that with your permission, I can play here on the show. Stay tuned for our next show. As a matter of fact, our next few shows, we're going to be talking about the new movie, The Shack. I think you're going to love this film.
It's got a tremendous spiritual message, very uplifting, just wonderful. And we've got some great interviews coming up. I think you're going to join it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's a 4-part interview series. This is a show that I don't think you're going to want to miss. So remember, the contact information for feedback and ideas, info@notold-better.com. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, and of course, notold-better.com. Talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks to all.